On the morning of April 26, 1999, the streets of Fulham in southwest London were deceptively quiet. Birds chirped from the bare trees, the sun had just begun its slow climb over brick terraces, and residents prepared for a Monday that promised to be ordinary, uneventful, and safe. On one unassuming house-lined street, a woman was about to walk out of her front door for the last time. She moved with the grace and composure that had made her a familiar presence in millions of homes across the country, her face synonymous with warmth, trust, and authority. Jill Dando, the celebrated television presenter, had built her career on crime stories, on guiding viewers through mysteries, on helping the public identify criminals and unravel events that seemed beyond comprehension. And yet, on that morning, she would become the victim of a crime that stunned Britain, defied explanation, and has remained officially unsolved for more than 2 decades. Jill had returned from a weekend trip and was preparing for a day of routine errands and personal commitments. She had recently purchased her home, an elegant terrace in Fulham, and renovation work was ongoing. Builders and tradespeople were expected to arrive later that morning, but at 11:32 a.m., before any of them could appear, a single gunshot rang out. Some neighbors later recalled the sound, trying to convince themselves it was a car backfiring or a dropped metal object. But within moments, it became clear that this was no accident. Jill Dando had been shot once, directly in the head, at extremely close range. There was no struggle, no warning, no robbery, no sexual assault, nothing taken or disturbed. She collapsed at her doorstep, and within seconds, the calm facade of that London street had been shattered. Emergency services arrived quickly, but there was nothing anyone could do. Jill Dando was dead. The precision of the attack immediately alarmed investigators. The crime had been executed with clinical efficiency. The bullet was a 9mm round, fired with such precision that it suggested intimate knowledge of firearms. The trajectory and positioning indicated that the shooter either pressed the gun to her temple or fired from extremely close range. There were no defensive wounds, no evidence of a struggle. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution, and the perpetrator had left little to no trace. For detectives, the question that consumed every thought was not just who had done this, but why. Jill Dando was a household name, yes, but she was not involved in politics, espionage, or organized crime. She did not make enemies on television or in her personal life that anyone knew of. She was trusted, admired, and safe, or so it seemed. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Britain had never seen such a high-profile murder outside the glare of war zones or political assassination attempts. Newspapers splashed her face across front pages. Television channels interrupted schedules. Millions of viewers who had welcomed Jill Dando into their living rooms were forced to confront a reality they had never anticipated. A killer had walked calmly down a residential street, aimed a gun at a beloved public figure, and left without detection. Conspiracy theories flourished. Was it a stalker? Was it a terrorist organization? Was it connected to her work on Crimewatch, the very program in which she had guided viewers to solve other people's crimes? The questions multiplied faster than the answers, and investigators were suddenly under immense public and political pressure to deliver results. The first leads were frustratingly thin. CCTV coverage in 1999 was not as comprehensive as today. Only a few partial images from nearby cameras captured any movement on the street, but they were grainy, low resolution, and inconclusive. Witnesses provided descriptions that were vague at best. One person reported seeing a man walking away from the scene calmly, not running, not panicked, dressed in dark clothing. Another neighbor thought they saw a delivery van pull away around the time of the shot. Nothing concrete. The precision of the attack, combined with the lack of witnesses and forensic challenges, suggested that the killer had prepared carefully and had knowledge of the area, of Dando's routine, and possibly of her habits. The sense of professional detachment in the act itself terrified investigators and the public alike. Theories were explored in every direction. Some suspected international paramilitary connections. Britain had been on high alert after years of IRA activity, including bombings that had claimed numerous lives in the 1990s. Some suggested Dando's murder could be an act of retaliation or intimidation linked to political causes. Others examined her television career. Could her role on Crimewatch, appealing to the public for assistance in solving violent crimes, have drawn the attention of someone who resented her? There were even conjectures that it could be connected to the Kosovo conflict, which Britain had been involved in through NATO airstrikes, and that her prominent public position made her a symbolic target. Yet none of these leads offered actionable evidence. No claims were made. No intelligence linked these theories to concrete individuals. The investigation risked drowning in speculation. Then, investigators focused on local suspects, narrowing in on a man named Barry George. George lived in the vicinity of Dando's home, had a history of minor offenses, and was socially isolated. He had an obsession with firearms and a fascination with celebrities. Evidence collected during the investigation revealed clippings of Jill Dando's appearances and articles about her in his home. Forensic examiners found a single microscopic particle of firearm discharge residue on the pocket of one of his coats. The particle was described as being consistent with proximity to a recently fired weapon, though it could not, on its own, prove direct involvement. Nevertheless, in 2000, Barry George was charged with Dando's murder. The arrest shocked the community, and the ensuing trial became a national spectacle. During the 2001 trial, the prosecution presented the case that George had sought notoriety and had fixated on Dando to achieve a twisted sense of control and power. They argued that the combination of his obsession with firearms, his knowledge of Dando's routines, and the firearm residue made him the prime suspect. The defense countered fiercely, emphasizing the circumstantial nature of the evidence, highlighting the absence of a murder weapon, and pointing out the lack of eyewitness testimony placing George at the scene at the time of the shooting. Despite the gaps, the jury convicted Barry George, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. For many, the conviction brought relief, a sense of closure for a grieving nation. The idea that someone had been held accountable provided a temporary balm for a case that had gripped the country with horror and fascination. Yet, as years passed, doubts began to surface. Advances in forensic science called into question the reliability of the single particle of gunshot residue that had been pivotal in the conviction. Scientific analysis suggested it could have been transferred from another source or contaminated during evidence handling. The absence of the actual firearm further weakened the certainty of the case. Appeals were filed. In 2008, Barry George's conviction was quashed, and a retrial was ordered. In court again, the prosecution's case appeared fragile. Without definitive forensic proof or a weapon, the arguments that had seemed persuasive in 2001 now felt insufficient. After a high-profile retrial, George was acquitted. He walked free, having spent 8 years in prison for a crime the evidence could not conclusively prove he committed. Britain was left with the haunting realization that the perpetrator of Jill Dando's murder had never been brought to justice. The investigation remains open. Cold case units continue to review evidence periodically, revisiting leads with newer technologies that did not exist in 1999. Forensic scientists have re-examined trace materials, surveillance footage, and witness statements in hopes of uncovering new insights. Yet, the challenges are immense. The absence of the murder weapon, the limited physical evidence, and the passage of time all combine to make this one of the most perplexing unsolved murders in modern British history. The questions remain the same. Who killed Jill Dando? How did they manage to carry out such a precise attack in broad daylight, on a residential street, and leave so little behind? Why did they choose her? The answers continue to elude investigators. For her family and friends, the years have been a relentless mixture of grief, anger, and frustration. Her fiancé, colleagues, and loved ones were left with a sense of helplessness as the case dragged on without resolution. Public fascination with the case has never waned, partly because Jill Dando was not just a public figure, but a trusted presence, someone who had spent her life shining a light on crimes and helping victims. The irony of her own murder remains stark, a reminder that violence can strike even those most attuned to the dangers around them. Her death was personal, national, and symbolic all at once, magnifying the sense of injustice that has persisted for decades. As the investigation continued, detectives considered all possible angles, from the local to the international. They explored whether her murder could have been a contracted hit, a vendetta from someone she knew personally, or the act of a psychologically disturbed individual seeking attention or control. Each lead was followed meticulously, yet most ended in frustration or dead ends. Witnesses who initially seemed helpful often proved unreliable, and forensic limitations of the time made definitive conclusions difficult. Every avenue led to more questions than answers, reinforcing the sense of mystery surrounding her death. Even years after that fateful morning, the Fulham street retained an ordinary calm that belied the horror that had once unfolded there. Children still played along the pavements, delivery vans continued to pass, and neighbors went about their daily routines, yet the memory of Jill Dando's murder remained a shadow over every brick and doorstep. Investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike would return to that street again and again, studying the scene in photographs, recreating the angles, trying to imagine how a killer could have acted with such precision. They knew that any ordinary scenario failed to explain the extraordinary efficiency of the crime. The calm, deliberate movement of the shooter, the lack of any panic, the choice of weapon and timing, all suggested a level of premeditation that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with a single, local individual. In the months following Barry George's acquittal, detectives revisited countless tips that had once seemed insignificant. Some witnesses came forward with recollections that had initially been dismissed. A neighbor remembered hearing a low hum of a van idling moments before the shot. Another recalled seeing a figure crouched near the street's end, half hidden in shadows. Each recollection was fragmentary, but collectively they painted an eerie picture of surveillance. Someone had been waiting, watching, anticipating the right moment. The notion that this was entirely random became increasingly difficult to maintain. Forensic psychologists posited that the killer had likely conducted surveillance over days, if not weeks, noting Dando's routines and identifying her comings and goings with precision. The crime bore the hallmark of a professional, or at the very least, someone methodical, calculating, and psychologically disciplined. The media frenzy surrounding Dando's death reached unprecedented levels for a domestic murder in Britain. Newspapers chronicled the smallest details of her life, her career, and her death. Television broadcasts speculated endlessly on motives, potential suspects, and forensic breakthroughs. Every celebrity news segment featured her name. Public fascination was intense, sometimes bordering on obsession. True crime forums and amateur investigators dissected every possible angle, from the possibility of a deranged local obsessed with fame to international assassination theories. Some argued it was retaliation for her Crimewatch work, pointing to the delicate timing of appeals she had presented just weeks earlier. Others insisted she had become the target of someone seeking notoriety or revenge for reasons that would never fully be revealed. In any case, the case captured the collective imagination, leaving a nation grappling with the vulnerability of even its most celebrated citizens. Behind the headlines, detectives worked tirelessly to parse the forensic evidence. Gunshot residue remained the most contested piece. The single particle on Barry George's coat, once thought sufficient to tie him to the crime, became a symbol of the challenges inherent in forensic interpretation. Advances in ballistic science, trace evidence analysis, and crime scene reconstruction allowed investigators to model potential trajectories, distances, and shooter positions with increasing precision. Each simulation emphasized just how difficult it would have been to execute the crime as it happened without intimate knowledge of Dando's schedule and surroundings. Some models suggested the killer could have observed her from a nearby window or van, firing once she was in exactly the right position. Other simulations implied an almost intimate familiarity with firearms, given the near-perfect placement of the shot. Every reconstruction reinforced the chilling efficiency of the act and the elusive nature of the perpetrator. Psychological profiling became a critical tool in the investigation. Behavioral experts examined Barry George, past threats, local offenders, and even international patterns of contract killings. Profiles suggested the killer likely possessed obsessive traits, possibly including a fixation on media figures or individuals perceived as symbols of societal trust. The calculated calm of the execution indicated emotional detachment. This was not a crime of passion, not an impulsive act fueled by anger or jealousy. It was cold, controlled, and deliberate. Profilers speculated on the presence of surveillance, rehearsal, and an acute awareness of potential witnesses, reinforcing the notion that the perpetrator was methodical and experienced. The idea that such a person could exist in plain sight, moving undetected through the same city streets as the victim, added to the unease surrounding the case. In parallel, investigators scrutinized Dando's professional life for possible motives. Crimewatch had brought her into contact with numerous criminals over the years, but none had surfaced with a credible link to her death. Television colleagues remembered her as cautious, polite, and meticulous, traits that would have minimized personal risk. Her work in investigative journalism and appeals to the public to assist in solving crimes may have inadvertently exposed her to dangerous individuals, but proving a direct connection remained impossible. International connections were examined, including potential links to paramilitary groups and foreign operatives. Intelligence agencies were consulted, and archives were reviewed, yet every line of inquiry failed to yield a definitive suspect. The cold facts reinforced the terrifying reality. The killer had managed to act with precision, evade detection, and leave behind almost no trace. The public's emotional response mirrored the complexity of the investigation. Jill Dando had been a comforting figure in households across Britain, and her death became not only a personal tragedy but a symbolic one. Opinion pieces and editorials expressed anger, fear, and a deep sense of injustice. Citizens questioned the security of public figures and the adequacy of police investigative methods. The media, while necessary for public awareness, also created a climate of intense scrutiny that complicated detective work. Every lead was examined in the court of public opinion long before it could be validated through evidence. This tension between the necessity of transparency and the dangers of speculation became a defining feature of the case, amplifying both public interest and investigative pressure. During the years that followed, detectives revisited Barry George's profile repeatedly, examining his movements, acquaintances, and psychological history. Despite his acquittal, law enforcement continued to assess him against new evidence and any emerging patterns. Other potential suspects were considered, ranging from deranged local figures to opportunistic criminals with fleeting connections to Dando's environment. International inquiries explored whether organized crime networks or politically motivated individuals could have orchestrated the attack. Each potential lead, however, ultimately led to frustration. Witnesses, memories faded, evidence was lost or degraded, and the passage of time obscured critical details. The case became emblematic of the challenges inherent in solving high-profile, low-evidence crimes, where the perpetrator is careful, the evidence sparse, and the window of opportunity for intervention narrow. The trial and acquittal of Barry George highlighted the limitations of forensic science at the time. Advances in ballistics, trace analysis, and DNA testing have since redefined the standards for conviction, yet the original investigation remained constrained by the tools and methodologies available in 1999. Retrospective reviews suggested that, with today's technology, investigators might have uncovered additional links, reconstructed trajectories with higher accuracy, or identified DNA evidence previously undetectable. The evolution of investigative techniques underscores both the possibilities and frustrations inherent in cold case work, where each passing year complicates evidence recovery while simultaneously offering new analytical tools. One of the most haunting elements of the Jill Dando case is the absence of motive. Unlike most high-profile murders, where anger, greed, or revenge can be established, Dando's death presents a perplexing void. She was cautious, trusted, and largely private in her personal life. She had no public enemies, no scandals, no threats beyond what any public figure might expect. Her murder appears to have been chosen for its symbolic value, or perhaps for reasons the killer understood alone. This lack of an apparent motive magnifies the intrigue, leaving both investigators and the public grappling with the unnerving question of why someone would select her for such a precise, public, and devastating attack. The Fulham street itself became a site of both grief and investigation. Detectives returned repeatedly, sometimes alone, sometimes with colleagues, measuring, photographing, and reanalyzing every angle. Modern recreations employed 3D modeling to simulate the trajectory of the bullet, the timing of witnesses, observations, and potential positions of a shooter. Each exercise reinforced the notion that this was not an impulsive crime. Every detail, from the angle of approach to the timing of the shot, suggested forethought, observation, and psychological discipline. For those involved, the realization that the killer may have rehearsed or planned for days made the crime even more disturbing. The impact on British society extended beyond the immediate tragedy. Security protocols for media personalities were reconsidered. Television networks reviewed the safety of their staff, particularly those involved in investigative or on-location programming. The murder prompted debates about public accessibility, the responsibility of law enforcement to protect high-profile individuals, and the challenges of balancing privacy with public engagement. The case also sparked interest in the limitations of forensic evidence, the dangers of circumstantial reliance, and the complexities of prosecuting crimes with minimal physical traces. Even now, discussions around the case include debates about potential alternate suspects, ranging from organized criminal networks to lone obsessives. Retrospective analyses by criminologists, journalists, and true crime writers suggest that the killer may have possessed a combination of obsessive focus, patience, and technical skill. They argue that the precision and timing of the attack indicate familiarity with firearms and with the victim's environment, hinting at an individual capable of meticulous planning. Theories abound, but none have led to a conviction or definitive identification. For Jill Dando's family, the emotional toll has been profound and unrelenting. They have endured not only the loss of a beloved daughter, colleague, and friend but the enduring uncertainty of not knowing who was responsible. The acquittal of Barry George reopened wounds and left questions unanswered. Yet their resilience and willingness to engage with the investigation have kept public attention on the case, ensuring it has not faded into obscurity. Public commemorations, media retrospectives, and continued investigative coverage have sustained the collective memory of Dando's life, career, and tragic death, highlighting the persistent human desire for closure and justice. The passage of time has not diminished the case's significance. Cold case units periodically review evidence, apply new forensic techniques, and consider previously unexamined leads. Technological advancements, including improved DNA sequencing, digital reconstruction, and geographic profiling, offer potential pathways to breakthrough discoveries. However, the longer a case remains unsolved, the more challenges accumulate. Memories fade, evidence deteriorates, witnesses relocate or pass away, and investigative context is lost. Jill Dando's murder exemplifies these challenges, standing as a stark reminder of the fragility of justice in the face of meticulous criminal planning. In the end, Jill Dando's story is not only a crime narrative, it is a portrait of societal vulnerability, the complexities of forensic investigation, and the enduring human struggle for answers. One shot, fired in broad daylight, executed with calm precision, removed a cherished figure from public life and left a void that has never been filled. The killer walked away, leaving behind questions that remain unanswered, evidence that remains incomplete, and a legacy of suspense and emotional resonance. Every April, as the anniversary of her death approaches, the nation reflects on the fragility of life, the persistence of mystery, and the enduring hope that truth, no matter how long delayed, might one day emerge. Even as years turn into decades, the Fulham street remains ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in memory. Children play, cars pass, and life continues, yet the echoes of that morning linger. Investigators, journalists, and the public remain captivated by a crime that defied comprehension and challenged the limits of forensic science. Jill Dando's life, her career, and her death continue to captivate because they touch on universal fears. The randomness of violence, the vulnerability of the ordinary, and the cruel efficiency of a crime without resolution. Her murder stands as a testament to the complexities of human behavior, the persistence of investigative work, and the enduring hope that even the coldest mysteries may one day reveal their truth. If you want to uncover more chilling unsolved cases like Jill Dando's and dive deeper into mysteries that still haunt investigators, subscribe now to our channel for your regular true crime fix. Don't stop here. Watch more real-life cold cases on our channel and explore the stories that continue to shock and intrigue the world.